My name is Eleanor, and I never thought the day would come when the two people I had loved and nurtured for years, my son and the woman he chose as his wife, would turn against me with such violence that I would taste my own blood on the kitchen floor. It happened on a Sunday evening, a day that should have been filled with the smell of roast chicken and the sound of laughter from my grandchildren. Instead, it was the day I saw the cold glint in Ethan's eyes, the look of a predator, not a son, and the moment Sophie's hand struck me so hard across the face that I stumbled back into the corner of my own home. There was no argument loud enough, no misunderstanding big enough to explain why my own flesh and blood would attack me like an enemy. I can still feel the sting of her fingers, the sharp crack echoing in my ears, and then the sudden weight of Ethan's grip on my shoulders as he shoved me against the wall. My chest burned, not only from the blow but from the unbearable truth settling into my heart. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a loss of temper. This was deliberate. My husband Robert shouted my name and tried to push Ethan back, but the son I raised turned on him with a fury that belonged to a stranger. I heard the thud of Robert's body hitting the ground, the desperate groan as air rushed out of his lungs, and I realized in that instant we were not safe in our own home. I could barely recognize the man standing before me, Ethan, my boy, now a grown man with hard lines etched across his face, eyes wild with something darker than anger. "Mom, stop fighting us," he hissed, his breath hot, his tone chillingly calm beneath the violence. Sophie stood just behind him, her lips curved in a cruel smile, the same mouth that had once called me Mom with sweetness when she first married into the family. Now her voice was sharp as broken glass. "You've held on to everything long enough, Eleanor. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Her words sliced deeper than the slap, because they weren't spoken in rage but in cold calculation. Every second stretched into an eternity as my mind spun, trying to piece together the why, the motive behind this sudden betrayal. Was it money? Was it resentment? Was it something darker? Some truth I had overlooked for years? Robert struggled to his knees, coughing, his eyes filled with shock and disbelief. He had always believed Ethan's smile, always dismissed my instincts as paranoia, but in that moment, I knew he finally saw what I had sensed all along. Our son was not here to care for us. He was here to destroy us. Ethan pressed me harder into the wall, his voice low enough that it felt meant only for me. "You don't understand, but you will." That sentence froze me more than the blows, because it meant there was a reason, a hidden truth buried beneath decades of family life, and he was willing to break my bones to keep it hidden. I felt Sophie's hand tighten on my arm, her nails digging into my skin like claws, and I wanted to scream, but my voice was strangled by the betrayal itself. This was the girl I had trusted with my son's happiness, the one I had welcomed to our Sunday dinners, the one I had rocked her babies to sleep for when she was exhausted. Now she was my jailer, holding me still while Ethan decided how far this attack would go. My body trembled, but my mind raced. I had to survive long enough to learn why, to hear the truth behind their cruelty, because I understood instinctively that the attack was not just about anger, it was about silencing me. And when I saw the flicker of panic in Robert's eyes as he reached for my hand, I knew that whatever was coming next was bigger than a bruise. Bigger than fear, it was the unraveling of everything we thought our family stood for. My son and his wife had attacked me, but the most terrifying part was not the pain in my ribs or the blood on my tongue. It was the dawning realization that the answer to why would be far more devastating than the attack itself. I sat on the living room couch later that night, every muscle in my body still trembling from the confrontation, my cheeks swollen where Sophie had struck me, the taste of iron thick on my tongue. Robert sat beside me, clutching his ribs, his face pale, his breath shallow. The house that had always been my sanctuary now felt like a crime scene. The lamp cast long shadows across the walls, and every creak of the floorboards above sent jolts of terror through me. Ethan and Sophie had gone upstairs after the attack, claiming they needed to talk privately, but Robert and I knew they weren't whispering about reconciliation. They were calculating, planning, waiting for their moment. My hands shook as I poured water into a glass, spilling half of it onto the counter. Robert took it gently from me, but even his touch was unsteady. "We need to leave," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the staircase. "Now, tonight." His words pierced me, but I knew he was right. Yet leaving wasn't as simple as walking out the door. Ethan had our car keys, and Sophie's phone had been in her hand the entire evening like a weapon, ready to erase any trace of what had happened, ready to twist the narrative if we dared speak. "They won't let us just walk away," I murmured, my voice hoarse. Robert looked at me with the same terror I felt in my bones. "Then what do we do? Wait until they finish what they started?" The thought made my stomach clench. Upstairs, I heard a burst of laughter, Ethan's voice, but colder, sharp like a knife's edge. Sophie's reply followed, muffled but unmistakably cruel. They weren't worried. They weren't guilty. They were confident. That terrified me most of all. People who act out of rage eventually cool down. But people who plan, who calculate, who rehearse their lies, those are the ones who are truly dangerous. I thought back to the way Sophie's hand had pressed into my arm, not wild or uncontrolled, but steady, purposeful. That wasn't a slip of anger. That was intent. My chest tightened as I recalled Ethan's words. "You don't understand, but you will." What was it I was supposed to understand? What secret was so important that my son was willing to brutalize the very parents who raised him to keep it hidden? Robert leaned closer, his whisper ragged. "I never wanted to tell you this, Eleanor, not like this, not with blood still drying on your face. But you need to know. You need to know why he's doing this." I turned to him, my heart hammering. The look in his eyes wasn't just fear, it was guilt. He was hiding something that had been buried for decades. My hands clutched his sleeve. "What are you talking about?" His voice cracked. "It's about David." The name struck me like another blow. My eldest son, gone for 25 years. His death always explained as a tragic accident. He had slipped, they said. Lost his footing near the gorge. I had grieved for years, but I had accepted the story because the alternative was unthinkable. Robert's eyes brimmed with tears. I saw Ethan that night. I saw him with David. My blood ran cold, my body rigid. The laughter from upstairs suddenly seemed louder, echoing like a taunt through the floorboards. "You knew?" I hissed, my voice breaking. "You knew all these years?" Robert shook his head desperately. "I didn't know everything. I thought it was an accident, Eleanor. I wanted to believe it was an accident. But the way Ethan looked at me afterward, the way he begged me not to tell you, it's haunted me every day since." My mind spun as though the walls were collapsing inward. The son who had attacked me tonight wasn't just angry, wasn't just greedy. He was hiding a secret darker than I had ever imagined, a secret tied to his own brother's death. My knees weakened, and I gripped the arm of the couch to steady myself. Above us, Sophie's footsteps creaked across the floor, deliberate, slow, as if she knew we were hanging on every sound. I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling Robert to stay quiet, though my heart was thundering so loudly I was certain it could be heard upstairs. If they realized Robert was revealing the truth, if they suspected we knew too much, the next attack wouldn't stop at bruises. It would be final. I closed my eyes for just a moment, trying to steady my breathing, trying to process the revelation. My son had attacked me. My son had possibly killed his brother. And now, with his wife as his accomplice, he was preparing to silence us forever. In that moment, I understood something chilling. This wasn't about one act of violence. This was the continuation of a pattern, a plan that had been festering for years. The attack was only the beginning. The real nightmare was still coming. The night dragged on like a noose tightening around my throat, each tick of the clock louder than the last. Robert and I sat in silence, our bodies stiff, our ears straining for every sound from upstairs. The house felt foreign, hostile, as if its walls had turned against us. Every creak of the old floorboards made my skin prickle. Every whisper between Ethan and Sophie above us fed the dread blooming in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt nailed to the floor. Robert's confession echoed in my head, refusing to quiet. I saw Ethan with David that night. The words had shattered the fragile reality I had built for 25 years. My eldest son hadn't died in an accident. My youngest son had been there, had hidden the truth, and Robert had buried it to protect him. And now, after decades of silence, the rot of that secret was seeping through the cracks, poisoning everything. I turned to Robert, his face gray with exhaustion and shame. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I whispered, my voice trembling but sharp enough to cut. He pressed his hands over his face, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of his guilt might crush him. "Because I couldn't lose you both," he whispered. "David was already gone, and if I told you that Ethan might have caused it accidentally or not, you'd never look at him the same again. I thought I was saving what was left of our family." His words were salt in an open wound. I wanted to strike him, to shake him, to scream that his silence had doomed us all. Instead, I swallowed the rage and clutched the fabric of the couch, digging my nails into the cushions until my fingers ached. The floor above groaned, and Sophie's laughter sliced through the air like glass shattering. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Their voices drifted down, muffled but clear enough. "She's weaker than I thought," Sophie said. "It won't take much." Ethan's reply was low, menacing. "We just need to time it right. Make it look natural. No one will suspect a thing." Robert's eyes widened, and I saw the sweat bead on his forehead. This wasn't a passing argument or a fleeting act of violence. They were planning. They were rehearsing. I grabbed Robert's hand, squeezing it so hard he winced. "We need proof," I whispered fiercely. "If they try again and we survive, no one will believe us without evidence. We can't just tell the police our son attacked us. They'll say it was a misunderstanding, a family fight." Robert nodded weakly, his mind racing. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and slid it under the edge of the couch, setting the recorder to run. "If we don't make it," he whispered, "at least someone will hear the truth." The thought chilled me, but it was the only lifeline we had. Suddenly, footsteps thundered down the stairs. I scrambled to sit upright, forcing my face into something resembling calm. Ethan appeared first, his silhouette dark against the dim hallway light. Sophie followed, her expression sharp and hungry, her hand resting casually on Ethan's arm, as if they were just another loving couple. "Mom, Dad," Ethan said smoothly, his tone dripping with false concern. "We didn't mean to scare you earlier. Tensions got high, that's all," Sophie added quickly. "We just want what's best for you." Her voice was syrupy sweet, but her eyes flicked toward Robert's phone on the coffee table, searching, calculating. For a moment, I thought she had seen the hidden recorder, and my heart stopped beating. But then she smiled, wide and hollow, and I realized she hadn't noticed yet. Robert forced a cough, his voice rough. "It's late. We should all get some rest." Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, tomorrow will be a new start." His words sent a chill down my spine. "A new start for whom?" "Certainly not for us." Sophie leaned down and kissed my cheek, the same cheek she had slapped earlier, her lips cold and mocking. "Good night, Mom," she whispered, and the false tenderness made bile rise in my throat. As they retreated back upstairs, I let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Robert turned to me, his face pale. "They're not waiting long," he muttered. "It's coming soon." My pulse pounded in my ears, and I knew he was right. We had only hours, maybe less, before Ethan and Sophie decided to finish what they had started. And, somewhere inside that ticking clock of terror, I had to find a way to survive long enough to uncover the truth, because Robert's half-confession wasn't enough. I needed to know everything. Why Ethan had turned into a stranger, why Sophie had joined him, and what, exactly, they were willing to do to make sure I never spoke another word. The house was silent again, but it wasn't peace, it was the silence of a predator waiting in the shadows, biding its time. I looked at Robert, his chest rising and falling unevenly, and I made a vow then and there. If my son was truly the monster he revealed himself to be, then I would not go quietly into the grave he was digging for me. I would drag the truth into the light, even if it cost me my last breath. The morning light that seeped through the curtains did nothing to soften the darkness inside our home. Robert and I hadn't slept. We had sat in silence, our bodies rigid, our minds trapped in a loop of fear. Every sound of the house settling felt like a threat. Every passing car outside made me wonder if Ethan and Sophie had already begun laying the groundwork for whatever story they would tell once we were gone. My stomach clenched as I forced myself to stand, the bruises from last night screaming with every movement. Robert rose slowly beside me, his hand pressed to his ribs. Neither of us dared to speak loudly, as though words themselves might provoke another attack. The smell of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, and for a split second I wanted to believe it was just another Sunday. But then Sophie's voice rang out, sharp and false. "Good morning, Mom, Dad. I made breakfast for everyone." The sweetness in her tone was suffocating. Robert and I exchanged a glance, silently agreeing to play along, because resistance was no longer survival, it was suicide. We walked into the kitchen, and the sight chilled me. Sophie moved with practiced ease, setting plates of pancakes and scrambled eggs on the table as though nothing had happened the night before. Ethan sat already, his posture relaxed, his smile warm enough to fool anyone but us. "Come on, sit down," he said, motioning to the chairs. "Let's have a family meal like old times." I could feel my pulse hammering in my neck. Last night's violence had not been a loss of control. It was the unveiling of the mask they wore now so effortlessly, pretending to be dutiful children, while behind their eyes lay only calculation. I lowered myself into a chair, forcing my hands not to shake as I lifted a fork. Robert sat stiffly beside me, his eyes fixed on Ethan. We didn't speak, we let them lead the conversation. Sophie poured orange juice into my glass and placed her hand over mine with that same false tenderness. "You've been under so much stress lately, Eleanor. We just want to help you. Don't you think it's time to stop worrying about all these responsibilities? The house, the bills, the money, it's too much for you and Dad at your age." Her words were honey, but her grip was steel. Ethan leaned forward, his tone smooth but firm. "She's right. You've worked hard your whole lives. Isn't it time to let us take care of things? If you sign over control, we can manage everything for you. You'll never have to worry again." I swallowed hard, the eggs turning to dust in my mouth. I knew what they were doing, laying the foundation for their next move. To anyone else, their words would sound like love. To me, they were threats. Robert cleared his throat, his voice rough. "We'll think about it." Ethan's eyes locked onto his father's, a spark of irritation flickering before his smile returned. "You've been thinking for months, Dad. Maybe it's time to act. You can't put this off forever." Sophie nodded, sliding a pen across the table as if by accident. "We already have the paperwork ready. Just a few signatures, and everything will be simple." The pen glinted in the morning sun like a weapon, and for a terrifying moment I thought Robert might actually reach for it just to stop the tension. I pressed my knee against his under the table, shaking my head subtly. Not yet. The air grew heavy, the silence between us stretching taut. I felt my throat close as Ethan's gaze fixed on me. "Mom," he said softly, "you trust me, don't you?" The words were a dagger twisted gently. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Did I trust him? My son, the boy I had nursed through fevers, the young man I had defended through mistakes, the father of my grandchildren? Trust had been shattered the moment his hand shoved me into the wall. I forced a weak smile, knowing the only way to survive was to pretend. "Of course," I said, my voice barely audible. Sophie's smile widened as though she had won something. "Good, then let's do this together." She slid the pen closer. My fingers twitched, wanting to hurl it across the room, but I stayed still, my body frozen between defiance and survival. Robert pushed back his chair abruptly, the legs scraping against the floor. "Enough," he said, his voice steadier than I expected. "We said we'll think about it." His eyes never left Ethan's. The tension snapped, and for a moment, I thought violence would erupt again. Ethan's jaw tightened, but then he chuckled, shaking his head. "All right, Dad. Take your time, but don't take too long." The words lingered in the air like a curse. Sophie gathered the plates with forced cheer, humming softly, but I saw the storm brewing in her eyes. As she turned to the sink, I leaned closer to Robert and whispered so faintly I could barely hear myself. "They're tightening the noose." He gave the slightest nod, his lips pressed into a thin line. We both knew time was running out. As we left the table, I glanced back at Ethan, who was watching us with that same cold glint I had seen the night before. My stomach churned. This wasn't about care or love or responsibility. It was about control, about erasing us as obstacles. And I finally understood. Last night had been just the first step. The real attack was coming, and it would be far worse than bruises and threats. The following days crawled forward like a nightmare on repeat, each morning beginning with forced smiles from Ethan and Sophie, each night ending with whispers through the walls that made my blood run cold. Robert and I moved like ghosts in our own home, pretending to be calm, pretending to be grateful for their help, but beneath every polite nod was the raw terror that any moment could be our last. The bruise on my cheek had darkened to a deep purple, an unspoken reminder of Sophie's handprint, but she acted as if it wasn't there at all. She served me tea with her usual smile, asking about my health, her voice syrupy sweet, but her eyes always darted toward the lockbox where we kept important papers. I caught her there once, her fingers grazing the lid before she noticed me watching. She only laughed and said, "I was dusting." Robert grew more restless by the hour. At night, lying beside me in the dark, he whispered plans that terrified me as much as the danger itself. "We could try to run," he said. "Catch a bus, disappear before they notice. But where would we go, and what if they caught us in the attempt?" The thought of Ethan's fury if we tried to escape made my heart seize. No, the only option was to endure, to wait, and to gather proof. On Wednesday evening, they came into the living room together, their expressions bright, their tone unnaturally cheerful. "We've been thinking," Ethan said, lowering himself onto the couch as if he were the master of the house. Sophie perched on the armrest, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Next weekend is your anniversary. 40 years together, right? That deserves something special." I felt Robert stiffen beside me. My breath caught. Nothing about their cheer sounded genuine. Ethan's smile was too wide, his eyes too sharp. "We want to take you on a trip," Sophie announced. "A family hike. Something relaxing. There's a trail with a beautiful lookout. A perfect place for pictures. You'll love it." Her words slid into me like ice. A trail. A lookout. My mind conjured cliffs and drops into endless darkness, and my stomach turned. Robert forced a weak laugh. "You know we're not exactly hikers anymore." Ethan leaned forward, his voice soft but insistent. "Don't worry. It's an easy trail. Even kids can do it. We'll handle everything. You just come along and enjoy yourselves." He paused, his gaze drilling into me. "It'll be a memory we'll all treasure." I looked into his eyes and saw it the same glint of calculation I had seen the night David died, though I hadn't recognized it then. Now it was unmistakable. This wasn't a gift. This was an invitation to our execution. I forced my lips to curve into a smile, though it felt like stretching cracked glass. "That sounds thoughtful," I said, my voice shaking. Sophie clapped her hands together with mock delight. "Wonderful." Then it settled. Saturday morning, bright and early. "I'll pack everything we need." She leaned down, pressing a kiss to my cheek, her lips brushing the very bruise she had left days before. The message was clear. I know, and I don't care. After they went upstairs, Robert and I sat frozen in the dim light, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. "Finally," Robert spoke, his voice a low growl. "They're going to kill us." Hearing the words aloud shattered any last shred of denial I had clung to. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. "We have to be ready." Robert stood, moving to his desk. From a hidden drawer, he pulled out a small notebook and began to write. His hand trembled, but his words were steady. "This is for Clara," he said, "my younger sister, the only person I trusted outside these walls. If something happens, she'll know everything." He sealed the letter in an envelope and slid it beneath a stack of documents in the cabinet where we kept our insurance papers. Next, he held up his phone. "I'll record everything. From the moment we leave this house, every word, every movement, it'll all be documented." His determination gave me strength, but terror still gnawed at my insides. Evidence would mean nothing if we didn't live long enough to deliver it. That night, I lay awake listening to the footsteps upstairs. Sophie moved back and forth, packing bags, her laughter spilling down the staircase like poison. Ethan's deeper voice joined hers, rising and falling in rhythm with their cruel anticipation. My heart pounded with every sound, knowing those bags weren't for a picnic. They were preparing for murder disguised as a family outing. Robert turned to me in the dark, his eyes catching the faint glow from the streetlight outside. "We're walking into their trap," he whispered. "But it's the only way to catch them. If we run now, they'll find another way. At least in the mountains we'll know what's coming." His words twisted in my chest. He was right, but the thought of stepping onto that trail, knowing each step might be my last, filled me with a dread so deep I could hardly breathe. As dawn broke the next day, I stood at the kitchen window, staring at the quiet street, clutching my mug of coffee like a lifeline. I thought of David, my lost boy, and the possibility that his brother had stolen him from me. And now, that same son was preparing to finish what he had started years ago. My heart ached, but beneath the grief, A spark of fury ignited. If Ethan and Sophie wanted us to fall into the abyss, they would have to fight for it. Because I was not ready to die, not without dragging their secrets into the light. Saturday morning arrived with a sky too blue, a mocking brightness that made my chest ache. It should have been a day of celebration, 40 years of marriage. A milestone Robert and I had once dreamed of marking with laughter, travel, maybe even the ocean we had never seen. Instead, it was a death march. The air in the house felt thick, heavy, every sound exaggerated. Sophie hummed in the kitchen as she packed snacks into a canvas bag, her voice cheerful and sharp, each note twisting like a blade. Ethan moved briskly from room to room, double-checking supplies, ropes, harnesses, water bottles, a first aid kit that looked less like preparation for safety and more like props for a performance. Robert sat beside me on the couch, his face pale but hard, the envelope for Clara tucked deep inside the cabinet upstairs, his phone hidden in the lining of his jacket pocket. His eyes met mine, and without speaking we made the same vow. Whatever happened today, we would not go quietly. "Ready?" Ethan's voice rang from the hallway, too bright, too eager. He appeared holding 2 brand new hiking poles and tossed them onto the floor in front of us. "Thought you might need these, Mom. Don't want you stumbling on the trail." His grin made bile rise in my throat. Sophie followed with her ever-present smile, sliding her sunglasses onto her face. "It's going to be a beautiful day. Let's make it unforgettable." Unforgettable. The word echoed through me, colder than ice. The drive was 2 hours, each minute stretching like a lifetime. Ethan insisted on driving, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road with a predator's patience. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, turning frequently to chat, snapping photos of Robert and me in the back seat, as though we were smiling parents on a joyful family trip. The click of her camera was unbearable. Every photo, I realized, was preparation for their story, proof that we had been happy, careless, moments before tragedy struck. I stared out the window at the blur of trees and houses, gripping Robert's hand until my knuckles turned white. His phone was recording from his pocket, its red light concealed but burning in my mind like a beacon of hope. If nothing else, the truth would survive, even if we did not. Halfway there, Sophie twisted in her seat, her tone dripping with feigned affection. "Mom, you'll love the lookout. It's breathtaking. You'll see the whole valley. Perfect for a couple like you, celebrating 40 years, don't you think?" She didn't wait for an answer, snapping another photo before turning back with a satisfied smirk. Ethan chuckled. "You'll finally get that adventure you always wanted, Dad." His knuckles flexed on the steering wheel. "Life's short. We should make the most of it." His words dripped with double meaning, and my stomach twisted into knots. The closer we came to the mountains, the quieter the car grew. Sophie tapped her nails against the window, a rhythmic pattern that felt like a countdown. Robert leaned toward me, whispering so softly I almost couldn't hear him. "Don't react. Just breathe." I obeyed, though every breath tasted of fear. When we finally reached the trailhead, my body felt like lead. Ethan parked carefully, pulling into a spot at the edge of the gravel lot. Sophie hopped out first, stretching, her voice high and cheerful. "Smell that fresh air. Perfect day for a hike." She opened the trunk, revealing the backpacks they had prepared. The ropes were coiled neatly inside, the metal carabiners gleaming in the sunday. Robert's eyes flicked toward me, and I knew he was thinking the same thing. These weren't tools for protection. They were stage props for murder. Ethan slung a pack over his shoulder and handed Robert another with a forced grin. "Here you go, Dad. Thought you could carry the first aid kit. You never know when something could happen on a trail like this." Robert's lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing, slipping the straps onto his shoulders. His hand brushed mine briefly, a silent reminder that the phone was recording, that every word might one day condemn them. We started walking, the trail winding upward into the trees, the air cool and sharp. Sophie moved ahead, snapping pictures of wildflowers, pointing out the scenery, her performance flawless. Ethan fell behind us, his footsteps deliberate, the weight of his stare pressing between my shoulder blades. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig underfoot felt like a warning. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Sophie called back, her voice echoing. "This will be a memory we'll keep forever." I wanted to scream at her, to hurl the truth into the open, but I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. Memories. Yes, but not the kind she imagined. As the trail grew steeper, my legs ached, my breath came harder, and I realized with cold certainty that this was part of the plan. They wanted us exhausted, weak, unable to resist when the time came. Robert stumbled slightly, and Ethan was there instantly, his hand steadying him with false care. "Careful, Dad," he murmured. His grip lingered too long, too firm, and when Robert pulled away, Ethan's smile returned like a mask snapping back into place. The forest grew quiet as we climbed higher, the sound of the world below fading until there was only the crunch of gravel beneath our feet and the pounding of my heart in my ears. Somewhere ahead lay the lookout, the place where they planned to end us, and with every step closer, I felt the invisible hands of fate pressing harder against my back. The trail narrowed as we climbed, the trees thinning, the sunlight sharper as it spilled across jagged rocks. My legs burned, each step heavier than the last, and I could hear Robert's labored breathing beside me. We weren't hikers, we were grandparents who took slow walks in the neighborhood park, and yet here we were, trudging up a mountain trail meant for the young and strong. Ethan knew that. Sophie knew it too. That was the point. Sophie walked ahead, her camera clicking endlessly, her cheerful commentary floating back toward us. "Look at that ridge. Oh, and those wildflowers. Wait until you see the view from the top." Every word sounded rehearsed, like she was narrating the happy family outing she planned to retell later to anyone who asked. "They were smiling, they were happy," she would say. "It was just a tragic accident." Behind me, Ethan lingered, his footsteps deliberate. I could feel him watching every stumble I made, every time Robert slowed. When Robert reached for a tree trunk to steady himself, Ethan stepped forward quickly, offering an arm with exaggerated concern. "Careful, Dad. Don't want you falling too soon." His words were light, almost playful, but they curdled in my stomach. I glanced back, meeting his eyes for just a second, and what I saw there froze me. No warmth, no sun, just calculation. Robert caught my arm when I faltered, whispering under his breath, "Keep going, don't stop." His jacket rustled as he adjusted the strap of his backpack, reminding me that the phone was still recording. Every word, every sinister joke, every false smile, it was all being captured. The thought gave me a flicker of hope, but it was faint against the terror building with each step higher. The trail bent sharply to the right, opening onto a smaller path that veered off from the main route. Sophie stopped there, turning with a grin that made my blood run cold. "This way," she said, pointing toward the rocky incline. "It's a shortcut to the lookout, harder but quicker." Robert frowned. Maybe we should stay on the main trail. But Ethan was already moving toward the narrow path, his backpack clinking with the sound of metal. "Trust me, Dad. This will be worth it. The view is incredible." His voice was persuasive, firm, leaving no room for refusal. I looked at Robert, and in his eyes I saw the same fear that was strangling me. This was it. The detour wasn't about a shortcut. It was about isolation. No hikers, no witnesses. Just the four of us and the cliff they had chosen. We followed, because we had no choice. The rocks shifted under my shoes, sharp and loose. Sophie skipped ahead effortlessly, laughing as though she were a carefree girl on a picnic. Ethan stayed behind, close enough that his shadow seemed glued to mine. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, his voice low, mocking. I didn't answer. I couldn't trust my voice not to break. As the trees thinned further, the sound of the wind grew louder, carrying with it the faint rush of water far below. My heart pounded harder. We were close, too close. Sophie stopped suddenly, turning with a bright smile. "There," she said, pointing ahead. I followed her gaze and saw at the edge of the world. The cliff rose above the valley, a jagged lip of rock that dropped straight into nothingness. The view was breathtaking, yes, but all I saw was death waiting at the bottom. Robert's hand squeezed mine, his palm clammy, his grip desperate. He leaned toward me, whispering so softly I barely heard him over the wind. "This is the place." His voice cracked, and I knew he was right. Sophie bounded to the edge, raising her camera. "Come on, you two. Let's take some photos with the valley in the background. It'll be beautiful." Ethan moved closer, his presence heavy behind us, guiding us forward like cattle toward slaughter. My legs shook as we stepped onto the flat rock near the edge. The wind whipped at my hair, the ground uneven beneath my feet. I dared a glance at Robert, and in that moment we both knew the next few minutes would decide whether we lived or died. Sophie lifted her camera, her smile fixed, her finger hovering over the shutter. "Closer," she urged. "A little closer to the edge. We need the perfect shot." I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my body trembling as I forced one foot forward. The abyss yawned behind me, and Ethan's shadow loomed larger. My heart screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. Not forward, not back, not down. We were trapped, and the only way out was through the nightmare waiting at the cliff's edge. The wind howled around us, as if the mountain itself were warning me to step back, but Sophie's voice cut through it, cheerful and commanding. "Just one more step. We need the valley in the shot." Her camera was raised, her finger ready, her eyes glittering with something darker than excitement. Robert and I stood stiffly at the edge, the world dropping away behind us, nothing but empty air and jagged rock below. I could feel Ethan closing in from behind, his breath steady, his footsteps deliberate. Every instinct in me screamed that the moment had come. Robert shifted slightly, keeping one arm around my shoulders. To anyone else, it might have looked like a husband embracing his wife for a sweet photo, but I felt the tension in his muscles, the way his hand pressed firmly into me as if to signal, "Hold on, be ready." His phone was still recording, capturing every word, every click of Sophie's camera, every breath of this monstrous charade. "Closer together," Sophie chirped, moving sideways to frame the shot. "Yes, that's it. Smile." But the smile never came. Instead, Ethan's hand clamped down hard on Robert's shoulder, pushing him subtly, inch by inch, closer to the precipice. My heart leapt into my throat. "Ethan," I croaked, my voice thin. "Careful, we're too close." He leaned in, his lips near my ear, his voice low and venomous. "That's the point, Mom." Before I could react, his weight shifted, his body pressing into us with sudden force. Robert stumbled, dragging me with him, our shoes scraping against loose gravel that shifted dangerously beneath our feet. The world tilted, the horizon spinning, the abyss yawning open behind me. For a moment, I was certain it was over. Robert roared with a strength I had never heard from him before, twisting his body and grabbing Ethan's wrist. "Not today," he shouted, his voice raw with fury. The two men grappled, their feet sliding across the uneven rock. I clung to Robert's arm, my nails digging into his jacket, every muscle straining against the pull of gravity. Sophie's mask of sweetness shattered. She dropped the camera to her chest and lunged forward, her hands shoving against me. "Just let go already," she hissed, her voice sharp as broken glass. The impact drove me backward, my heel teetering on the edge. I screamed, the sound lost in the roar of the wind, but Robert held on. With a desperate lunge, he dragged me forward, even as Ethan yanked hard against him. The three of us locked together, a grotesque dance of life and death, teetering at the brink. I saw the madness in Ethan's eyes, no fear, no hesitation, only determination. "You should have signed everything over," he snarled. "This didn't have to be messy." Sophie screamed, "Push them!" And the next instant, Ethan shoved with all his strength. The world vanished. My stomach lurched as the ground disappeared beneath my feet, the sky flipping upside down, the valley rushing up to meet us. The air tore at my face, my ears filled with the deafening whistle of freefall. I clutched Robert's hand with every ounce of strength I had, my other arm flailing uselessly in the emptiness. For one horrific heartbeat, time slowed. I saw Sophie's face above us, her expression twisted with triumph as she snapped one last photo. I saw Ethan's silhouette framed against the sky, his body leaning over the edge to watch us fall. Then the impact. Agony exploded through me as my body slammed against the rocks. A crack like thunder echoed in my ears, and I couldn't tell if it came from the stone or my bones. My vision went white, then red, then blurred. I tasted blood, thick and metallic, filling my mouth. Every breath was fire. Beside me, Robert groaned, his grip miraculously still tight around my hand. His face was pale, his chest heaving with shallow, painful breaths. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice ragged. "Don't move, play dead." The words jolted through me, cutting through the haze of pain. Play dead. Pretend it was over. Pretend we hadn't survived. The plan we had spoken of in whispers, the only chance we had left. I forced my body to go limp, fighting every instinct to cough, to cry, to scream. My eyes stared unblinking at the jagged sky above. My chest rose only slightly, shallow enough to appear still. Above us, voices drifted down. Ethan's, breathless but triumphant. "It's done. They're gone." And Sophie, her tone almost giddy. "Finally. Now it's just us." Their words sank into me, heavier than the rocks that pinned my body. They thought we were dead. They thought they had won. But I was still here. Robert was still here. And the truth, recorded in his pocket, lived with us. The battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. The world around me was a blur of agony and silence, but I forced my body to remain still, my eyes half open in a lifeless stare, my breathing shallow enough that it barely stirred the dust around me. Every nerve screamed for release, for movement, for air, for anything but this. But Robert's whisper still echoed in my ears. "Play dead." So I did. Beside me, his hand remained wrapped in mine, limp but firm enough that I knew he was alive. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, until footsteps crunched above us. Ethan's voice carried down, strained but triumphant. "It's over. They're gone. Nobody survives a fall like that." His tone was laced with satisfaction, a twisted pride that made my skin crawl. Sophie's voice followed, lighter, sharper, and more venomous than ever. "Good. Finally. You have no idea how long I've been waiting for this moment. No more pretending to love them. No more Sunday dinners. No more smiling through gritted teeth." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound that echoed off the gorge walls. "Now it's just us, Ethan. Just us, and everything they left behind." I felt Robert's hand twitch ever so slightly in mine, and I prayed Ethan hadn't seen it. My heart pounded so hard I feared they'd hear it echo from below. But the voices continued, unaware of the life still beating beneath their lies. "They left plenty," Ethan muttered. "The house, the savings, the land, it'll all be ours. It was always supposed to be mine anyway. Richard got in the way, and then they started questioning me. This was the only way." My body stiffened, a scream clawing at my throat, but I swallowed it down. Richard, my firstborn, the son whose death I had mourned for decades. His name was now spoken not with sorrow but with guilt, guilt that revealed the truth. Ethan hadn't been a grieving brother. He had been a killer all along. Sophie gasped. "You shouldn't say that out loud." Ethan's reply was a snarl. "What does it matter? They're dead. No one will ever know." But they would. The phone in Robert's pocket was still recording, capturing every vile word, every confession. The device we had placed our last shred of hope in was now holding the key to justice. If we could survive long enough to deliver it. Sophie's voice softened, coaxing, like she was already planning the next step. "We'll need to stick to our story." They slipped. It was tragic. We tried to save them, but we fell too. We're the lucky survivors. Poor us. The grieving children. She laughed again, and the sound chilled me more than the wind slicing through the gorge. "Everyone will believe us. We'll cry for the cameras. We'll hold the grandchildren at the funeral. No one will suspect a thing. They'll believe," Ethan said, his tone dark and resolute. "They always have. Mom was too soft to question me, Dad, too weak to face the truth. And now they're gone, just like Richard. I've cleaned the slate. This is my family now, my life." His words hit me harder than the rocks had. My son, the boy I had nursed, the boy I had defended when others doubted him, the boy I had loved beyond reason, was standing above me, declaring his right to erase us from existence. A monster in the skin of my child. For a moment, the footsteps shifted, coming closer to the edge. Pebbles tumbled down, landing near my face. My body screamed to flinch, to react, but I remained frozen, praying my stillness was convincing enough. Sophie sighed. "We need to get moving before someone notices we've been gone too long. Help me with this." More shuffling, bags rustling. Then Ethan again. "We'll say we ran for help. By the time they get here, it'll be too late for anyone to question." "Good," Sophie whispered. "Let's go. We'll be heroes in their deaths." Their footsteps retreated, fading into the rustle of leaves in the distant wind. Only when silence swallowed the gorge again did I dare to release a shallow breath. My chest screamed with pain, but the relief of hearing them leave was enough to push it down. Robert's hand, tightened faintly on mine, and I turned my head the tiniest fraction to meet his eyes. His face was pale, streaked with blood, his jaw clenched in determination. "They confessed," I mouthed silently. His eyes flickered in acknowledgement, the smallest nod. The wind whistled through the gorge, a cruel reminder of how close death lingered. Every bone in my body ached, every breath rattled with pain, but my mind burned with one thought. We had the truth. Ethan and Sophie thought they had silenced us, but they had handed us their own noose. I closed my eyes again, forcing my body still. The act wasn't over. They might return. They might test. We couldn't move yet, not until safety was certain. The game had shifted. No longer were we victims waiting to die. We were survivors holding the weapon they didn't know existed. And if fate allowed us one more chance, we would make sure the world knew exactly what our son and his wife had done. The silence after Ethan and Sophie's footsteps faded was almost worse than their voices. It was thick, suffocating, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breath. I dared to lift my head slightly, just enough to take in our surroundings. Jagged rocks jutted out around us like cruel teeth, the gorge walls towering high above, trapping us in a prison of stone. Sunlight barely touched the floor where we lay, leaving the air damp and cold. My body throbbed with agony, every bone screaming, but survival clawed louder than the pain. Robert shifted beside me, his face gray with shock. His lips were pale, and sweat slicked his brow. "Legs broken," he muttered through clenched teeth, every word costing him. "Ribs, too. Can't move much." I squeezed his hand, fighting tears. "We're alive," I whispered. The words felt fragile, almost laughable in the face of our situation. Alive but trapped. Alive but broken. Alive but hunted. I tried to sit up, my arms searing with pain. Something was wrong with my shoulder. Every movement sent sparks of fire through me. Still, I forced myself upright, gasping. The world spun, but I stayed steady enough to scan the gorge floor. There was no clear path out. The walls rose steep and sheer, slick with moss and loose earth. Climbing was impossible in our condition. "There's no signal," Robert said hoarsely, fumbling for his phone. His thumb brushed the screen, but the bars remained empty. No way to call for help. He let it drop against his chest, wincing at the movement. "If no one comes looking, we're finished." Panic surged through me, but I swallowed it down. Panic would kill us faster than our injuries. "Someone will come," I said, forcing strength into my voice. "Hikers, rangers, someone." But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't guaranteed. If Ethan and Sophie reported us as dead, rescue crews might come for bodies, not survivors. I dragged myself toward the small bag Sophie had dropped nearby. My fingers trembled as I opened it, bottles of water, some fruit, cookies, supplies meant to sell the lie of a picnic. Supplies that might now keep us alive. I uncapped a bottle and held it to Robert's lips. He drank greedily before pulling back with a groan, his face twisting in pain. "Slow," I warned, taking a sip myself. The water was lukewarm, metallic, but it slid down my throat like salvation. The hours crawled forward. Pain became a rhythm, each pulse of my body reminding me how close I teetered to the edge. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness, his breath shallow, his face growing paler. I pressed a piece of cloth against a gash on his side, praying it would slow the bleeding. "Stay with me," I whispered, over and over, as though the words alone could tether him to life. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps again above us. My blood froze, my body stiffening back into its corpse-like pose. But it was only the wind, whistling down the stone walls like mocking laughter. Still, the terror lingered. They could come back. If they realized we had survived, they would finish the job. As dusk crept in, shadows stretched across the gorge, swallowing the last warmth of the day. The air grew colder, and I pulled what little fabric I had around Robert and me. Hunger gnawed, but thirst and exhaustion were stronger. In the stillness, Robert's voice rasped weakly. "Eleanor, I should have told you years ago, about Richard, about what Ethan did." His eyes glistened in the dim light, guilt etched deep into every line of his face. "I thought protecting him meant protecting us. I was wrong." Tears blurred my vision. "We'll talk about it later," I said firmly, though my voice broke. "We'll talk about it when we're safe. Right now, we need to survive." Above us, the first stars began to appear, distant and cold. The gorge became darker, more menacing, but also quieter, a temporary reprieve from the horror of what had happened. I pressed my forehead against Robert's, closing my eyes, drawing strength from the faint beat of his pulse. "We're not done yet," I whispered into the darkness. "They think they buried us, but we're still here, and we're going to make sure the world knows what they did." The night pressed in, and with it came the chilling awareness that this was only the beginning. We had survived the fall, but survival was a long road, and the gorge was determined to keep us. The gorge was silent except for Robert's shallow breathing and the occasional rustle of leaves above. Darkness had settled in fully now, wrapping the world in shadows. I sat pressed against the rock wall, cradling Robert's head in my lap, fighting against the waves of exhaustion that threatened to drag me under. Every nerve in my body screamed with pain, but my mind was on fire, circling endlessly around the same truth. Richard's death had not been an accident. My son, my firstborn, my bright, laughing boy, had been murdered by his own brother. Robert stirred, groaning as he shifted, his face etched with guilt even in the faint moonlight. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice raw, "I can't keep it in anymore. You deserve to know." His words came haltingly, as though each one weighed a ton. That night, the night Richard died, I saw it. I saw Ethan shove him. The words pierced me deeper than the rocks had. My chest tightened. My throat burned. And for a moment I couldn't breathe. You knew?" My voice cracked, trembling with rage and disbelief. "For 25 years you let me believe it was an accident?" Robert's eyes shone with tears. I thought it was an accident at first. Ethan swore it was. He was crying, begging me, saying Richard slipped, that he just tried to defend himself. I wanted to believe him, Eleanor. I couldn't bear the thought of losing both sons in one night. His voice broke, and he turned away, ashamed. So I buried it. I told myself the truth would destroy us. But by keeping it, I destroyed us anyway. The dam inside me burst. Hot tears spilled down my cheeks, mixing with dirt and blood. I mourned Richard every day. I prayed for answers, for peace, and all along you had the truth locked inside you. My voice rose, hoarse and furious. You let me hug Ethan. You let me trust him. You let me call him my son while he was the monster who took Richard from us. Robert's body shook with sobs. "I'm sorry. God help me. I thought I was protecting you. I thought time would bury it, that Ethan would change. But instead he grew darker, and now we're here." He coughed violently, blood flecking his lips. "I failed you. I failed Richard. I failed us all." For a long moment, the gorge was filled only with the sound of our grief. I wanted to scream at him, to strike him, to punish him for the decades of lies, but beneath the fury was a hollow pit of despair. My family had been poisoned long ago, and I had been blind to it. I had clung to the fantasy of the perfect son, the dutiful daughter-in-law, the happy family dinners, while rot grew beneath the surface. I brushed Robert's damp hair back from his forehead, my anger melting into sorrow. "We can't undo it," I whispered. "We can't bring Richard back, but we can make sure Ethan never hurts anyone again." My voice steadied, hardening into resolve. "We have his words on the phone. We have what we overheard. If we get out of here alive, the world will know the truth." Robert's eyes flickered with a spark of hope. "Yes," he rasped. "We'll expose him. For Richard, for us, for the grandchildren." His grip tightened weakly on my hand. "Promise me, Eleanor. Promise me you won't stop until he pays." "I promise," I said, the words fierce despite the weakness in my body. "Even if it's the last thing I do." Above us, the wind shifted, carrying faint sounds, branches snapping, murmurs too distant to make out. My blood ran cold. Were Ethan and Sophie still nearby, circling like vultures, waiting to ensure we were truly dead? Or was it something else, hikers, strangers who might stumble upon us? Hope and terror warred inside me. I bent closer to Robert, whispering urgently, "We have to stay ready. If it's them, we play dead again. If it's someone else, we find a way to signal." And the minutes stretched, every second, suffocating. My mind replayed Richard's face as a boy, his laugh, his kindness. and then Ethan's eyes above the cliff, cold and unrepentant. One son buried by another, one husband bound by silence, one mother left to carry the truth. But the truth was no longer buried. It was here with me, bleeding and broken at the bottom of this gorge, and if I had to crawl out on my hands and knees, I would drag it into the light. The gorge had tried to claim me, but it would not take my voice. Not now. Not after everything. Morning broke with cruel beauty, the sunlight streaming down into the gorge as if mocking the darkness of our reality. Every muscle in my body screamed as I shifted slightly, my eyes barely slitting open against the glare. Robert lay motionless beside me, his chest rising faintly, his face pale but determined. We had survived the night, but survival was only half the battle. The other half was keeping the lie alive, the lie that we were dead. Voices came first, faint at the rim of the gorge, then growing louder. I froze, my breath catching. Sophie's voice floated down, perfectly pitched for tragedy. "Oh my God, they're gone! They fell, Ethan, they're gone!" Her words cracked, sobs laced into the sound, the kind of grief no one would question. Ethan followed, his tone masterful in its control, the voice of a devastated son. "Dad, Mom, please, no!" He shouted it so convincingly that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him myself. Then his tone softened as though speaking to Sophie. "We have to call for help. We have to report it." Robert's fingers twitched against mine. A warning. Stay still. Don't react. Above us, there was a flurry of movement, the snap of twigs, the crunch of boots on stone. "We'll tell them it was an accident," Sophie murmured, her voice lower but still carrying down the gorge walls. "We were taking pictures, and they slipped. We tried to save them, but we fell too. That's all anyone needs to know." Ethan grunted his agreement. "Exactly. We'll be the survivors, the grieving ones. No one will ever suspect." His words sliced into me, the cruel confidence of a man who thought he had finally buried his secrets. Minutes later, more voices joined theirs, deeper, authoritative. Rescue workers. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Could we trust them? Or would Ethan and Sophie twist even this moment into part of their performance? "We called as soon as it happened," Ethan told them, his voice breaking with well-practiced sorrow. "We've been searching, but we couldn't get down. Please, please tell me they're still alive." The rescuers shouted orders, ropes and harnesses clinking as they prepared to descend. I forced myself to stay still as the sounds drew closer, my body tense with the effort. Robert's grip on my hand steadied me, his silent vow echoing in my bones. "Hold on." When the first rescuer reached us, his voice was brisk, professional. "Two down here, male with weak pulse, female unresponsive." His gloved hands touched my neck, searching for signs of life. I fought every instinct to flinch, to open my eyes. His words to his team were my salvation. "She's barely hanging on. Get the medics down here." Above us, Sophie wailed. "Oh God, no. They're gone, Ethan. They're really gone." Her performance was so convincing it made bile rise in my throat. "They're my parents." Ethan's voice cracked. "Please, please save them if you can." The hypocrisy nearly broke me. My son, who had shoved us to our deaths, now begging for our rescue like a dutiful child. Every word was a dagger, but each dagger was also evidence. The phone in Robert's jacket was still recording, capturing not just confessions but the grotesque performance of two killers playing victims. The rescuers secured us onto stretchers, their movements efficient and rough. Pain flared through me as straps tightened across broken ribs, but I swallowed it down. If I cried out, if I showed them too soon that I was alive, Ethan would know, and he would silence me before the truth could surface. As they began to lift us upward, I heard Sophie's whisper, low and sharp to Ethan. "Remember, we stick to the story. They slipped. We tried to help. Nothing else." "I know," Ethan hissed back. "It's perfect. No one will ever know." But I knew, Robert knew, and soon, if we survived long enough, the world would know too. The ascent was slow, agonizing, every shift of the stretcher sending jolts of pain through me, yet beneath the suffering burned a fire brighter than fear. Ethan thought he had written the ending to our story. He thought the gorge was our grave. But as the rescuers pulled us toward the light, I swore silently that this was not the end, it was the beginning. The truth was climbing with us, recorded and alive, and it would not stay buried. The hospital lights were blinding after the shadows of the gorge, fluorescent beams stabbing into my eyes as if daring me to open them. I forced my lids heavy, my breathing shallow, my body slack against the stretcher. Machines beeped around me, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling my lungs. I was alive, but for now, I had to remain the corpse they believed I was. Nurse swarmed, voice urgent. Pulse faint. Possible internal bleeding. Prep for surgery. Another voice. Male patient critical but stable for now. Keep pressure on the chest. I wanted to open my eyes, to beg them to save Robert first, but I held still. The act was our only protection. Moments blurred into hours. Needles pricked, monitors hummed, whispers floated in and out. At some point, I felt the air shift. The nurse's brisk movements faded, replaced by softer steps, the creak of leather shoes. A hand brushed mine, warm, too familiar. Ethan. "Mom," he whispered, his voice dripping with false grief. "If you can hear me, I'm so sorry." His fingers tightened, squeezing with calculated gentleness. "I didn't want it to end this way, but you left me no choice." The words chilled me, each syllable a confession. My body screamed to recoil, to rip my hand away, but I lay still, praying one of the nurses was nearby. Then Sophie's voice joined his, syrupy sweet. "You were like a mother to me, Eleanor. You made me feel like family, but you should have known when to let go. This is our time now." She leaned close, her perfume sickly in my nostrils. "Rest in peace, for real this time." Their tones shifted as footsteps approached. Sophie's sobs rang out, perfectly rehearsed. "Doctor, how are they? Please tell me they'll make it." Her voice cracked, tears dripping into her words. "We can't lose them like this." "They're alive," a nurse answered, her voice steady but cautious. "But the next 24 hours are critical." I caught the faintest intake of breath from Sophie. Disappointment, quickly disguised as relief. Ethan said, louder now, "Thank God. We'll stay by their side. They're our parents. We'll take care of them." His performance was flawless. To the staff, he looked like the devoted son. To me, he was a viper coiled, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Through my half-lidded eyes, I saw a figure pause near my bed, a young nurse with sharp eyes and an ID tag that read INS. Her gaze lingered on Ethan's hand clutching mine, on Sophie's two perfect sobs. Then her eyes flicked to my face. For a heartbeat, I thought she saw through me. When Ethan and Sophie stepped away to speak with a doctor, Nurse INS leaned close, her whisper barely audible. "If you can hear me, move your finger." Every nerve screamed at me not to trust, not to risk, but hope surged too strong to ignore. Slowly, deliberately, I twitched my index finger. Once. Twice. 3 times. Her breath caught. "Oh my God," she murmured, her composure tightening instantly. "Stay still. Don't let them know. I'll get help." She straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place, and walked briskly away. My heart hammered against my ribs. Relief and terror mixed in equal measure. Someone believed. Someone saw. Minutes later, Ethan returned. Leaning so close, his words brushed my ear. "You'll never wake up, Mom. You're too weak. And even if you do, no one will believe you. We've built the story already. You're just a tragic accident waiting to be buried." His voice dripped with arrogance. "You should have stayed quiet. Richard should have stayed quiet. Now both of you are gone." He straightened as footsteps neared again, his mask of grief snapping back into place. "She's not responding," he told the nurse, his voice trembling. "Is there nothing more you can do?" But Nurse INS met his gaze with cool professionalism. "We're doing everything," she said. "Now please give us space." For the first time since the fall, I felt the faintest flicker of safety. A stranger had seen the truth. A stranger might be the bridge between life and justice. Robert groaned faintly in the bed beside mine, his voice weak but alive. "Eleanor." His whisper barely reached me, but Ethan heard it. "Dad!" Ethan exclaimed loudly, his tone perfect for the audience around him. "You're awake. Don't worry, we're here." But his eyes, when they darted toward me, were filled with pure menace. He wasn't finished. Not yet. And neither was I. The hours that followed were a blur of monitors beeping, hushed conversations in the hallway, and the suffocating presence of Ethan and Sophie hovering like vultures. I stayed in my act, still and fragile, letting them believe I teetered between life and death. But inside, I burned with fury, waiting for the moment to strike back, not with fists, but with truth. Nurse Inns returned often, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, her movements careful but deliberate. Each time, her eyes met mine, searching for the smallest sign. I gave it to her subtle twitches of a finger, the faintest squeeze of her wrist. She understood. I wasn't dead. I wasn't even finished. That afternoon, Ethan leaned close again, his words venomous but quiet. "If you do wake up, Mom, you'll regret it. We'll find another way to finish what we started." He smoothed the blanket over me with mock tenderness. "So for everyone's sake, stay asleep." But he didn't know Robert had already stirred enough to catch his threats. My husband's weak voice rasped from the next bed. "You monster." Ethan froze, then laughed softly, brushing off the insult as if Robert were delirious. "Rest, Dad. You're confused." His performance was flawless for the doctors and nurses, but Nurse Inns was there, scribbling notes faster than usual, her face pale and tense. That evening, when Sophie left to get coffee, Inns returned with 2 men in plain clothes. Police. My heart pounded so hard I thought my ruse would shatter. One officer leaned down, speaking low. "Mrs. Hale, if you can hear me, you are safe now. Blink once for yes." He blinked. Once. Hard. The younger officer's eyes widened, then softened with relief. "Good. We've been briefed. Nurse Inns told us everything she overheard. We'll protect you." He straightened, his expression neutral again as Sophie re-entered with her paper cup of coffee. The trap was ready. Later that night, Ethan and Sophie pressed the doctors for updates. "They won't make it, will they?" Sophie asked, her tone trembling with rehearsed grief. "We just want the truth." The lead doctor gave a vague response. "They're critical, but still fighting. It's too early to say." Ethan nodded solemnly, then leaned close to whisper, "Don't give them false hope. They're gone already." That was when Detective Johnson stepped from the shadows of the hallway. His voice was firm, cutting through the sterile quiet. "Funny, Mr. Hale. You sound awfully certain for someone who's supposed to be praying for his parents' recovery." Ethan froze. Sophie nearly dropped her coffee. Johnson pulled out a recorder. "We've heard enough. Between your whispered threats, your staged grief, and the evidence we've collected, it's over." "What evidence?" Ethan snapped, his mask slipping, anger seeping through. And then Robert spoke, weak but steady. "The phone, my jacket, it recorded everything." Ethan's face drained of color. That's not possible." But it was. Johnson held up the device sealed in an evidence bag. "Every word, Mr. Hale, including the part where you admitted Richard didn't slip." Ugh! The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Sophie's sudden shriek. "It was his idea. He killed his brother, not me." She turned on Ethan like a cornered animal. "I never wanted this." "Liar!" Ethan roared, his composure crumbling. "You pushed her at the cliff. You wanted them gone as much as I did." The officers stepped forward, their cuffs glinting under the fluorescent light. "Ethan Hale, Sophie Hale," Johnson declared, "you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Hale and the attempted murder of Eleanor and Robert Hale." The words hung in the air like salvation. My son, my betrayer, stared at me one last time as they dragged him from the room. His eyes were cold, devoid of remorse. He didn't see his mother lying there, he saw the enemy who had survived. And that was fine, because I was done being his victim. 6 months later, justice was served. Ethan and Sophie were sentenced to life without parole, their lives shattered by the recordings, the testimonies, and the truth we refused to bury. In court, I looked at my son one last time and said, "The night you killed Richard, I lost you forever. Justice cannot bring him back, but it will protect the innocent." Robert, frail but alive, squeezed my hand. We had survived the gorge, the betrayal, and even our own son. Now the house rang with the laughter of our grandchildren, a new beginning born from tragedy. At night, I still whispered Richard's name to the stars, promising his death was not in vain. The gorge was not our grave, it was our rebirth. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next family betrayal story.